Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Just like the last few, episode 274 of Cut the Clutter also stays in New York. But let me try and do it a little bit differently. And what is different now? Let me try and do it without mentioning the name Donald Trump. At least not after this. I've mentioned it once, not again. You will hear instead the name of Imran Khan several times. This is not about Imran and his meeting with Trump. This is not about anything that Imran may have said or written or spoken in an interview someplace else or in a speech. This is about one specific conversation that Imran Khan had, which has been seen a fair bit in clips, but very few people have seen the whole conversation. It's a 56-minute conversation that he had at Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, on, not off, Council on Foreign Relations. And he was in conversation essentially with Richard Haass, who's the president of the council. Richard Haass is a consummate old diplomat. He was the head of policy planning in Bush's White House between 2001 and 3. Remember, that was a very fraught period with 9/11, with parliament attack in India, with Operation Akram. Richard Haass knows South Asia very well. He's also a very accomplished strategic scholar and an author. So he's not somebody that you sit with and take questions lightly. So there he was in conversation with Imran Khan, and as you would expect, there were good questions asked. There were interesting answers given. Now, there are many in Pakistan who are making fun of Imran Khan. They are saying, oh, he seems to have had an attention lapse. He has made many admissions. He has said many things he should not have said, being the Pakistani Prime Minister, because some of these affirm many of the notions that people critical of Pakistan have had and that Pakistani establishments over time have denied. Now, I will list those and I will talk about those. But before I do all this, now Pakistan people have called him dumb, many people. In India, in any case, people don't say good things about him because they think, oh, look at this goof. He's now gone to New York and is subjecting his country to this kind of ridicule. But maybe, just maybe, there is a possibility that he is also trying to show that he is honest and he is different from leaders of the past, that he is willing to admit what his country did wrong. Although, as he says that, he gets caught in his own trap a little bit. I will come to that. Second, I think he also realizes possibly that if he is in conversation with Richard Haass at an institution like CFR in front of an audience of the kind that CFR would draw for this kind of an event in the UN week, as it's called in New York, then it's better to be straightforward than to fudge. So, what are the things that he has said which I find very interesting and important in these 56 minutes? There are a few things that have been talked about. For example, he is saying that the Pakistani Army and ISI trained Al-Qaeda. In fact, he goes on to say that not only did they train Al-Qaeda, they were actually hand in glove with them, not his words, my words. There were ties between them, and it's natural that they were working together. And he even goes backwards to say that when the Soviets came into Afghanistan, a lot of the world wanted to fight the Soviets there and they wanted Pakistan's help. So jihadis from all over the world came and Pakistani Army and ISI trained them. So those contacts came up, those are not to be denied. Then he goes on to say that in any case, I have been saying that when 9/11 happened, until then we were supporting these elements. We were hand in glove with them, my words. I'm shortening what he said. We were hand in glove with them. So when the Americans wanted us to help after 9/11, we made a 180-degree turn. We should not have made that 180-degree turn. In fact, he goes on to say later that instead of making a turn like this, maybe we should have stayed neutral. We as in Pakistan should have stayed neutral. Now that's an interesting point to make now for a Pakistani leader. In fairness, we should add that Imran Khan's consistent view from the very beginning has been this, that Pakistan should not have become a partner in the war on terror. Now, having said that, he goes on to say a couple more things. He says Osama bin Laden, when he's asked that Osama was found there was a commission of inquiry. What did the commission of inquiry find out? Now, I think he got foxed by that question. For the Prime Minister of Pakistan then to say that, well, there was an Abbottabad commission of inquiry. They did submit a report. What they said, I don't know. I mean, it's more than a bit odd if you are the Prime Minister of a sovereign country and you pretend that you have more power than your predecessors. What this confirms is that once again, really sensitive stuff that goes on in that country, including something like the Abbottabad Commission report, which investigated into why Osama bin Laden was living in Abbottabad, how did the Americans get in there, how did they get out unmolested and unchallenged, was there collusion? He probably has not seen that report, because even if he has seen it and he didn't want to admit that he has seen it or talk about it in detail, all he could have said, I have seen it, but I can't talk about this. But he didn't say that. In fact, he looked genuinely surprised. So once again, impression is confirmed that he doesn't control everything, or at least the crucial things when it comes to national security and military affairs. Then he goes on to, then Richard Haass asks him, and he says, look, I don't want to be disrespectful to you, but I have to ask you this question. There is an impression that in Pakistan, the Prime Minister doesn't have the power. The power essentially lies with the army chief and head of the intelligence, which is the head of the ISI. To which again the answer is interesting, but the answer I would say is not something that speaks very well of Imran and the authority that he claims within the system. So he articulates it quite nicely. He says that, look, politicians don't have physical power, they don't have militaries, they don't have firepower. Politicians only have moral authority. And if politicians lose moral authority, as all his predecessors, quote unquote, did, then nobody likes a vacuum and the army moves in. So before him, the army had moved in, but he said, since I have come in, every policy that I have followed, every step that I have taken, now he doesn't say that I tell my army to do what I think they need to do. He says, every step I have taken, every policy I have taken, my army has fully supported me. Now, this is, I mean, you might find it odd, but maybe you also find it factual and honest, that he is still not saying that I tell my army what to do. How do you even ask this question? I am the Prime Minister of my country, the army reports to me, the army chief reports to me. He is not saying that. He is saying everything I do, the army supports me. What that means is that he still mentally, intellectually, morally sees the army as being placed higher on Pakistan's power hierarchy than himself. Once again, you can call it dumb or you can call it honest. I will hold judgment on this. Maybe it is also naivety or innocence, but whatever it is a true statement. So he is not making a claim that you are talking about the past, Nawaz Sharif, Zardari, etc., etc. I am now the Prime Minister, very popular, and I control everything. It's been a long time since I have heard a Pakistani Prime Minister say that, why are you asking me this question? Because every Pakistani Prime Minister has been asked this question. Why are you asking me this question? I am the Prime Minister, my army chief reports to me. We didn't hear that from Imran also this time at CFR. Then he goes on to say something, I think he gets into the spirit of a sort of an intellectual conversation at a think tank. And when he is asked, do you think there was collusion between your army chief and the ISI chief and the American security agency, CIA, American army, whoever, to set up the Osama bin Laden operation, that is the assault on Abbottabad and his killing by American helicopter-borne SEALs, he smirks and he says, well, even President Obama said that my army chief and ISI chief were not involved. Nobody knew anything. With a smirk, then he says, because they were probably listening in on our conversations through that night. So this is an incredible admission, public admission by a Pakistani Prime Minister that the American intelligence was overhearing the conversations in his country, especially conversations between his army chief and his ISI chief. Now, having said that, a sidelight, there is a little history to this. When the war in Kargil was going on, Indian intelligence, in fact, had intercepted conversations between Musharraf, who was then army chief and he was in Beijing, and his chief of general staff in Rawalpindi. And those conversations were later released to public, and they proved for the first time that the soldiers, that the people, infiltrators in Kargil were not terrorists, not militants, they were regular Pakistani army. In fact, you can go back and check, all those conversations are available on internet and newspaper websites. Then he goes on to make a couple of other points. Afghanistan. Now, on Afghanistan, he says the Durand Line was drawn by the British. Durand Line is the boundary between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Pakistan's official stand is that the Durand Line was drawn between the British and then King of Afghanistan, and Pakistan, as the inheritor state, has inherited this boundary. So this is the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Afghans don't accept that border. So he makes the same statement. Durand Line was just a line drawn by the British. I don't think the Pakistanis themselves will like that statement. Then he says, only now we have started to fence it because militants were going from our side to their side or coming from that side to this side. Once again, I would say not so much stupidity, maybe a little bit of honesty, a great deal of naivety. Then the trickiest questions came. Trickiest questions, and to me, these are the most interesting ones. Trickiest questions came about China. Surprising thing about the conversation is that almost no member of the audience has asked Imran a question about Kashmir, which is what he really would have wanted. But there were a lot of questions about China, from how he is going to deal with Chinese loans. In fact, there were 3 questions, including one from Richard Haass himself, saying the Chinese are putting so much money into your country with CPEC, OBOR. Don't you worry about your sovereignty? And isn't it going to have a devastating effect on your foreign debt? In fact, the exact expression that Richard Haass uses is, would it not dramatically exacerbate your debt challenge? And also, would it not threaten your sovereignty? To which Imran Khan says, generally, look, China and we have a special relationship. They helped us when we were really down and out. We were going to have a default, and it's the Chinese and the Saudis and the UAE who gave us money to keep us afloat. I don't think the Chinese would do it, and Chinese are not the kind of people who come and interfere with your sovereignty or internal affairs. But to another question, which a woman in the audience asked, who said that, look, you have to worry about your sovereignty, and what about, you talk about Muslims all over the place, but look at what the Chinese are doing to Uyghurs. And if you don't complain about that, don't you worry that at some point, radical groups in your own country will start to complain about it or protest about it or act against this? To which again, his response to begin with is almost of fright. He says, with China, we have a very special relationship. We talk to China only privately. We don't talk to China in public, which is sort of very strange. Then he goes on to say, but who am I to judge China? Now, it's a question. You answer that question. It's about your ally. It's not a question about judging China or not judging China. And then he goes off on a very interesting tangent. He says, look at the Chinese. They have taken 700 million people out of poverty in 30 years, etc., etc. To which Richard Haass says that may be okay, but look at what the Chinese have done to civil liberties, look at what the Chinese have done to democracy, what have they done to their minorities, etc., etc. To which Imran says, the best thing you can do for human beings is to pull them out of poverty. Very cynical, smart, quote unquote smart, diplomatically, very cynical, very unconvincing. And then he goes on to say something which he truly should be embarrassed about. He goes on to say, look, the Chinese have been able to do it because he's then asked, would you then follow the same methods in your country? He says, Chinese have methods to enforce displacement, to enforce things, to bring about development that, his words, unfortunately I do not have, which means he is envying the Chinese for their authoritarian methods. And then he goes on to say, first of all, he says, unfortunately, I don't have, unfortunately, the Chinese model on development. Then he says, it's unfortunate that I don't have the Chinese authority on corruption also. And then counts the number of hundreds of thousands of people, minister level of people that Chinese have locked up in jail. And he says, if I had power like that, I would also lock up a lot of people in my jails. But unfortunately, quote unquote his words, unfortunately, I do not have power like that. So to me, that was a big highlight, of course. And then he talks about India in the end, and he says he worries more about India than about Pakistan right now because India has been taken over by RSS and by Hindu supremacists. That is something he has said before. Now, having said all this, let me tell you something. It is not for no reason that Imran Khan was given the moniker Taliban Khan. That's because from the very beginning of his politics, he's been openly sympathetic to the Taliban, to the Mujahideen, and to the Al-Qaeda cause, although Al-Qaeda was not named exactly like that. But even since Al-Qaeda came in, he has protested all drone strikes. In fact, in the hospital in Peshawar, where Malala was treated after she was shot, he went to that hospital and he condemned the killing of Taliban leader Hakimullah Masood in a drone attack. In fact, that story, you will see a picture of that story behind me in The Guardian from that time. And he has made many statements since then supporting the Taliban. And even now in this conversation, he says the Taliban is not who they used to be. Trust them and don't worry if there are setbacks and if terrorism goes on alongside. You have to live with that. I mean, you heard that from Imran Khan. And he said he's going to tell Trump also that he made a mistake in withdrawing or cancelling the Afghan peace talks. I am interpreting this just because there were some attacks or ceasefire violations, because you have to live with that. Those things will go on. You keep working towards some kind of a settlement with Afghanistan. So that's my summary of this 1 hour conversation with the highlights. To me, the most amusing part was Imran Khan saying in conclusion that his concern right now is not so much about Pakistan, but about India, which he thinks should be freed from the grip of Hindu supremacists. And he said that over these few days in New York, he's going to be appealing to the whole world, that the world has to come and intervene and do something. This to me is almost like the Prime Minister of Pakistan asking the world to get together and bring about a regime change in India. A bit rich, I would say. I would not say walking into the dim territory, because I don't like using those descriptions for people, but really this is a bit ridiculous.